Hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I've got a truly captivating story for you. One you definitely won't want to miss. So grab your seat, get comfortable, and let's dive right in. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share it with friends and loved ones. Now, let's get to the story. My name is Jonathan Miller. I am 43 years old. Emily and I met 17 years ago at a charity fundraiser in Boston. She was radiant in a way that didn't demand attention, yet couldn't be ignored. I was a rising financial analyst back then, cocky, driven, already earning enough to believe life bent toward my will. She worked in publishing, bright-eyed, with that intoxicating mix of ambition and warmth that made me want to pull her close and never let go. We dated for just under a year before I proposed, convinced I'd found a partner who would both ground me and keep pace with my ambitions. For the first few years, marriage felt like a mutual victory. We traveled, Paris, Santorini, Kyoto, posting photos of champagne on balconies as if we were the poster couple for success. My friends admired her. My colleagues envied me. But somewhere between the boardroom promotions and my increasing absences, I started to see her more as an accessory to my life than a partner in it. She wanted more shared time, deeper conversations, a future that wasn't just bank statements and vacations. I wanted to push harder, earn more, and flaunt the results. The distance between us didn't grow overnight. It crept in like a slow fog, making it harder to see each other clearly until one day we couldn't see at all. The breaking point came after my third consecutive missed anniversary dinner. I'd been in Chicago closing a deal and texted her a simple, "We'll make it up to you." She didn't reply that night. Or the next. 2 weeks later, she sat me down in the living room and said, calmly but with eyes glistening, "John, I don't think I'm the person you want to love anymore." I told her she was being dramatic. She told me she was done. The divorce was civil on paper but brutal in spirit. I kept the loft. She moved across town. And while I wouldn't admit it to anyone, I felt an immediate need to prove, to myself, to her, to the world, that I was better off without her. I threw myself deeper into work, upgraded my car, started dating women who fit neatly into the social image I'd built. Whenever mutual friends mentioned her, I brushed it off with a smug, "I wish her the best," though inside, I nurtured a petty satisfaction imagining her life shrinking without me. I pictured her renting some cramped apartment, scraping by, maybe regretting how quickly she'd let me go. Then, 3 weeks ago, Michael, an old mutual friend, slipped it into conversation over coffee. "Did you hear Emily's getting married again?" I nearly choked on my espresso. I forced a laugh. "Really? To who?" He shrugged. "Some guy named Daniel. I don't know much about him, but from what I hear, he's not exactly loaded." The phrase "not exactly loaded" landed like a small, delicious gift. I imagined her settling for some average Joe who probably couldn't even get a reservation at the kind of restaurants we used to frequent. A man who'd never see the inside of a private airport lounge, who'd buy her flowers from the grocery store instead of sending long-stemmed roses to her office. For the rest of that day, and the days that followed, I carried the news like a private joke. Emily, the woman who once had the best, me, was about to marry beneath her. In my head, I played out how I'd tell it to my circle. She traded a penthouse view for a picket fence and a minivan, I'd say, chuckling over martinis. But the truth was, I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted to witness the downgrade, confirm that I was still the pinnacle she'd left behind. I found out the wedding was set for a Saturday in early June, at a vineyard just outside Providence. It wasn't hard to get the details. People still assumed I cared enough to send a gift. I didn't bother RSVPing. Instead, I planned to show up quietly, blending in just enough to watch from the edges. I told myself it was pure curiosity. But underneath, I knew exactly why I was going. To stand there, smirking inside, as I saw her pledge herself to a man who, in my mind, would never measure up. I pictured it already. A modest arch of flowers, maybe a small crowd of relatives, a groom in an ill-fitting suit. I imagined leaning casually against a column, rehearsing a perfectly timed remark for when Emily spotted me. "Didn't think you'd invite your past to see your future, but, congratulations." The fantasy carried me for weeks. Each time I thought about it, The bitterness I'd kept buried since the divorce loosened into something sweeter. The morning of the wedding, I woke before my alarm. The sunlight spilling across my bedroom floor felt like a spotlight, reminding me of the performance I was about to give. I showered, shaved, and chose my outfit with the precision of a man heading into battle. Charcoal-tailored suit, white shirt crisp enough to cut glass, shoes polished to a mirror shine. If Emily was going to see me, she'd remember exactly what she'd walked away from. On the drive to Providence, I rehearsed lines in my head. Some were subtle, looks like you've kept it simple. Others were barbed, guess the economy's hitting everyone. I smiled at my own wit, imagining the flicker of regret that might pass over her face when she saw me. The GPS led me down winding roads lined with blooming dogwoods, their petals scattering like confetti across the pavement. The vineyard appeared suddenly, rolling hills of green under a sky so blue it almost felt staged. The driveway was lined with white ribbons, fluttering in the breeze, and I slowed, surprised at the understated elegance of it. Still, I told myself, appearances can be deceiving. Anyone can rent a pretty venue for a day. I parked near the far end of the lot, away from the other cars, sleek sedans, a few luxury SUVs, nothing out of place for New England. I adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror, my reflection offering a final nod of approval. As I approached the main lawn, soft music drifted from a string quartet stationed under a white canopy. Guests milled about with glasses of champagne, their attire a blend of refined and relaxed, linen dresses, tailored blazers without ties. I scanned for Emily, my heart thudding with a mix of anticipation and something I refused to name. I didn't see her yet, but I caught snippets of conversation. Someone praising the wine selection, another commenting on the charitable work the groom was involved in. I smirked. People always find something flattering to say about the couple at a wedding. Finding a shaded spot near the aisle, I kept my head down, pretending to check my phone while my ears stayed open. Every detail I could gather would be ammunition later. A middle-aged woman beside me turned and smiled politely. "Are you with the groom's side or the bride's?" I glanced up. "Brides. Old friends." "Ah," she said, her smile widening. "Emily's a treasure. And Daniel, well, they're perfect for each other." Perfect, I thought. We'll see about that. As the chatter grew, I caught sight of movement at the far end of the aisle. The ceremony was about to start. I straightened, ready to see this so-called poor man. My inner script was primed. Notice the cheap suit, the nervous posture, the way he clung to Emily like a man afraid of losing her. The music shifted to a gentle swell. Guests turned. And then he appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, walking with a calm confidence that was almost unnerving. His suit wasn't flashy but perfectly tailored, the kind of fit you only get from a skilled hand and a lot of attention to detail. His dark hair was neatly combed back, his eyes scanning the guests with genuine warmth. I blinked. This wasn't the image I'd been carrying for weeks. He paused halfway down the aisle to shake hands with an elderly guest, leaning in to speak so the man wouldn't have to strain. People clapped his shoulder as he passed, their faces lighting up, not out of politeness, but out of affection. I told myself it was just good manners. Maybe he was the kind of guy who overcompensated for his lack of means by being overly nice. And then I saw Emily. She stepped into the sunlight in a simple but stunning gown, her hair swept up, her smile unguarded and luminous. She wasn't looking at the guests. She wasn't even glancing around for approval. Her eyes were locked on him, and the pride in her gaze made my stomach tighten. I waited for my moment. Maybe after the ceremony, when they mingled with guests, I'd sidle up, deliver my line, and watch the realization dawn on her that I was still the man she couldn't replace. But as I stood there, the lines I'd polished all morning felt oddly brittle. The picture in front of me didn't match the narrative I'd been holding on to. Still, I stayed put. There was time yet. The reception would give me plenty of opportunities to make my point. For now, I watched, silent, as they took each other's hands under the arch of flowers. The officiant began to speak, his words drifting over the vineyard like a blessing. I reminded myself why I was here, not to wish them well, not to reminisce, but to see the proof that Emily had traded down. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. The ceremony unfolded with an ease that felt unsettling. I'd been to enough weddings to know when joy was forced, when smiles were tight and laughter a little too sharp. But here, every glance, every chuckle, every quiet murmur between guests seemed genuine. It was the kind of atmosphere you can't manufacture. From my vantage point under the shade of an oak tree, I could see the rolling vineyard stretch behind the arch where Emily and Daniel stood. The vines, heavy with early summer grapes, swayed in the soft wind like rows of quiet witnesses. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the bouquets tied to each chair. I scanned the crowd again, looking for cracks. Maybe fewer guests than I thought. No, there had to be at least 100, and not the kind of people who fill a seat out of obligation. They leaned in during the vows, nodding with eyes that spoke of knowing the couple well. When Emily spoke her vows, her voice trembled, not from uncertainty, but from emotion so strong it made my throat tighten against my will. I once thought love had to be loud to be real, she said, her gaze fixed on Daniel. But you taught me it can be steady. That it can grow quietly, without fear. You are my safe place. Steady. Safe. Words she'd once begged me for, though I'd been too busy climbing to hear them. Daniel's vows were simple. No sweeping metaphors, no theatrics. Just the kind of honesty that makes the air feel still around you. I don't promise you a perfect life, he said, but I promise to choose you every day, especially on the days when it's hard. Applause rippled through the guests. My chest felt oddly heavy. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and as they kissed, the crowd rose, clapping and cheering in a way that felt more like a celebration of something already proven rather than a hopeful beginning. At the reception, long wooden tables were set up under strings of warm lights. Mason jars overflowed with wildflowers, and the wine flowed freely. A folk band played softly in the background, the kind of music that makes people sway without thinking about it. I took a seat at the far end of one table, trying to blend in. A waiter offered me a glass of Pinot Noir, estate grown, he said, one of their best vintages. I accepted, more to keep my hands busy than to enjoy it. From across the lawn, I watched Daniel move through the crowd. People gravitated toward him, hugging him, clapping his back, speaking to him with a respect I didn't expect. He didn't seem to be working the room like a man desperate to prove himself. If anything, the attention seemed to embarrass him slightly, and he'd redirect it back to the person he was talking to. I caught snippets of conversation from guests nearby. Ever since he funded the after-school program. He never takes credit, but the shelter wouldn't even be standing without him. Doesn't care about money, really, just wants to help. My jaw tightened. Money. So he did have some. Enough to donate, enough to fund things. So why had Michael called him not exactly loaded? Emily passed close by, her laughter carrying above the music. She didn't see me, her focus was entirely on the elderly woman at her side, guiding her gently toward a chair. Emily's dress caught the golden light just so, making her look younger than I remembered. Or maybe just happier. I shifted in my seat. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. I was supposed to sit here smug, maybe a little pitying, secure in my belief that I'd been her best. Instead, a creeping unease had started to take root. It was in the way Daniel looked at her like the rest of the world blurred out. It was in the way she looked back, her eyes saying more than her vows had. The rest of the evening blurred into a series of moments I couldn't shake, Emily resting her head briefly on his shoulder during a quiet song, Daniel pulling out a chair for her without breaking conversation. Guests raising glasses not just to their love, but to their character. By the time the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the vineyard in shades of amber and rose, I realized I hadn't thought of a single cutting remark in over an hour. I wasn't sure if I'd lost my nerve, or if I was starting to lose something far more unsettling, the certainty that I was the better man. It happened slowly, like the way a tide creeps in and surrounds your ankles before you realize you're standing in the water. I was lingering near the dessert table, pretending to decide between lemon tart and chocolate mousse, when two men beside me began talking about Daniel. Man's as generous as they come, one said, his Boston accent curling around the words. And he never wants anyone to know it. If I'd inherited that kind of money, I'm not sure I'd be half as decent. I froze. Inherited? The other asked. Yeah. His grandfather was some kind of shipping magnate. Left Daniel the vineyard and a good chunk of the family fortune. But he runs it like it's a community hub, not a business. Donates the profits every year. Keeps just enough to live comfortably. My hand tightened around the dessert plate. Comfortably. From the looks of the place, comfortably meant more than I'd ever imagined. I told myself it didn't matter. Money wasn't everything. But the truth was, I'd built so much of my identity on it that hearing he had both wealth and the moral compass to downplay it felt like a direct shot to my ego. I drifted toward a group of guests, catching more fragments. That hospital wing, all because of him. Didn't even put his name on it. Volunteers at the soup kitchen every other Friday. The image I'd been clinging to, a poor man barely scraping by, was shattering piece by piece, replaced by something infinitely harder to swallow. It wasn't just that he wasn't poor. It was that he was everything I wasn't. Humble where I'd been proud. Generous where I'd been calculating. Present where I'd been absent. I tried to catch Emily's eye at one point, thinking maybe I could salvage some control of the moment. She glanced my way, briefly, and smiled, a polite, distant smile that carried no trace of longing, no flicker of regret. It was the smile you give to someone who once mattered but no longer holds a place in your life. I remembered the night she told me she was leaving, how I'd smirked and said, "You'll come back when you realize what you've lost." Looking at her now, I knew that moment had passed long ago, and she hadn't looked back once. The music shifted to a slow dance, and Daniel took her hand, leading her gently to the center of the lawn. The lights above them glowed warm against the deepening sky. She rested her head against his chest, and he kissed the top of her hair like it was the most natural thing in the world. Something twisted in my chest. Not jealousy exactly, it was sharper than that. A mix of shame and clarity that made me feel both exposed and small. I thought about the years we'd been married, how I'd measured my worth in things I could buy, milestones I could display. I thought about all the times she'd asked me to just be there, to listen, to share the small things. And I thought about how easily I'd dismissed her when she'd finally had enough. The mocking words I'd spent weeks preparing were gone, erased from my mind like chalk in the rain. In their place was a quiet realization I couldn't ignore: she hadn't downgraded. She'd found someone who gave her what she'd always needed. And that someone was better than me. The dessert in my hand suddenly seemed ridiculous. I set the plate down untouched and stepped away from the table. The laughter, the clinking glasses, the music, all of it seemed to swell and close in around me, until I felt like an intruder in a place I didn't belong. I didn't wait for the speeches. I didn't say goodbye. I just slipped toward the parking lot, the sound of their celebration fading behind me. For the first time in years, my pride felt like a weight I couldn't carry. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I made my way to the car. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the distance but because of the thoughts pressing in on me. The air outside the vineyard was cooler, the breeze tugging gently at my jacket like it wanted me to turn back, but I didn't. I couldn't. Sliding into the driver's seat, I gripped the steering wheel and just sat there. The laughter from the reception drifted faintly through the open window, a reminder of the world I'd just left behind. A world where she was happy in a way I'd never managed to make her. I didn't start the car right away. Instead, I stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The sharp suit, the polished shoes, the carefully combed hair, it all looked like armor. But armor against what? Not against loss. Not against regret. And certainly not against the truth. As I sat there, memories began to surface uninvited. The time she asked me to leave work early to watch the first snow of the season with her, and I told her I had more important things. The dinner where she opened up about her fears for the future, and I responded with a lecture on financial planning instead of reassurance. The nights I came home late, too tired to notice the effort she'd put into making the place feel warm, lived in, hours. Each memory landed like a stone in my gut. I thought about Daniel, about how he'd guided her across the lawn, hand steady at her back, eyes focused on her as if she were the only thing that mattered. I thought about the way she smiled at him, not the practiced, social smile I'd been given so many times, but something softer, deeper, as if it came from a part of her I'd never been allowed to see. The hum of an approaching car snapped me out of it. A couple I didn't recognize parked nearby, their laughter easy and unguarded as they headed toward the reception. They didn't notice me, and I was glad. The last thing I wanted was to answer questions about why I was leaving early. When I finally turned the key in the ignition, the dashboard lights flickered to life, casting a cold glow across my hands. I drove slowly down the winding road, the vineyard shrinking in the rearview mirror until it disappeared entirely. The highway back to Boston was quiet. My phone buzzed once, a calendar reminder for a meeting on Monday, but I ignored it. The only thing I could focus on was the silence in the car, a silence that seemed to echo the one inside me. Somewhere near Quincy, I pulled into a rest stop and sat with the engine off, watching the faint shimmer of the city lights on the horizon. It occurred to me that I hadn't been this still in years. I'd built a life on motion, on climbing, reaching, acquiring, but tonight, motion felt pointless. I thought about calling someone, maybe to distract myself, maybe to spin the evening into a story that made me the hero. But the truth was, I didn't have the energy to lie to myself anymore. By the time I reached my loft, it was close to midnight. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The city skyline glowed faintly through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I sank into the couch without removing my jacket. The silence pressed in, thicker now, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't try to fill it. I just let it sit there with me, heavy but honest. Eventually, I poured myself a drink, not out of celebration or habit, but as if I needed something to hold on to. I stared into the amber liquid, my mind looping back to Emily's vows, to Daniel's steady gaze, to the way they seemed to exist in a space I'd never been able to create for us. I took a slow sip and let the burn settle in my chest. It wasn't jealousy that kept me awake that night. It was the realization that she'd found the kind of love I'd been too proud, too blind, to give her. And as much as it stung, I knew there was no one to blame but myself. Thank you for watching. See you in my next video.